Welcome to episode 3 of the 2024 Planning Congress podcast. In partnership with the Planning Institute of Australia, UrbanTalk is hosting a special podcast series in the lead up to the 2024 Planning Congress in Melbourne, which takes place between the 22nd and the 24th of May. The 2024 Congress theme is Reinvention, Planning in a Time of Change, and it's all about how the planning profession can seize opportunities in this moment of change. In this podcast, we'll invite some of the Congress speakers to discuss their topics to give you an insight into what you can expect from Congress. My name is Belinda Barnett and I'm the podcast host. For this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Ross Harding, founder and managing director of Finding Infinity. Ross's company has earned the enviable reputation of being Australia's most radical environmental consultancy. Welcome, Ross.
Thanks very much.
You are an engineer, a financier and a creative, which is a formidable combination. What I love about your skill class is that you can design projects that connect people, cost them, prove their profitability, and capture the investment to make them happen. To start the podcast, can you give our listeners an insight into what drives you?
Guess maybe the kind of easy answer for me on that is that as a child, I was probably a bit of a troublemaker. I was a pretty annoying kid, and I think there was probably a period of time there where I decided to try and fit in and be a little bit get along with people a bit better. But then I think in time I kind of realized that that's inside of me. So I think I'm quite driven by challenging things and challenging the kind of the way that we're doing things. But I think also more broadly, I guess I just sort of look at work as something that can be perfectly aligned with purpose. And I think if we're 40 hours a week plus for 40 years of our life, we should try and align that with something that brings us meaning and purpose. So I think I'm pretty passionate about causing trouble in a positive way, if that summarizes it.
Well, it's most probably quite apt then that you are speaking at Congress about doing it differently, and particularly some of the fantastic work that you've been doing to transform Melbourne into a self-sufficient city, to turn it from being a consumer to a producer, to make it 100% renewable, water neutral and zero waste. What does doing it differently mean to you?
I really look at sort of what we're doing more broadly as problem solving. And I think that a lot of people in the construction industry could be or should be or are aligned on that front. And I think sometimes we're put into silos of, being an engineer or being an architect or, being a developer or doing a specific role on a project. But I don't know, I think more it's, for me, some of the most interesting things that we're involved in at the moment are when our role is not necessarily clearly defined and the project is not necessarily following a standard pathway, a conventional pathway. Sometimes if you want to try and do things differently, you need to change the process. And so I guess I like to look at it more as using different sort of techniques at solving problems. So I guess when you talk about my background of engineering, finance and creative stuff, our team really tries to lean into those different components of problem solving. I think sometimes it's good to try and be creative and try and design something. Sometimes it's good to try and solve something with numbers first. And sometimes, it is around a piece of technology that we need to kind of find a way to make it work financially and creatively. So I think also sometimes there's exciting ways of shortcutting things. I think that we try and solve a problem in the same way that we've been failing for so long. I think that you get exhausted because you just hit a brick wall and you can't break through. But I think sometimes it's fun to think outside the box and see how you can kind of, while there's conflict going on here, let's just go around the side and try and get on with it somehow.
Creativity seems to be quite fundamental to your approach about doing things differently.
Look, to be honest, if numbers were enough, I'd probably still be doing numbers. I spent a long time writing technical financial strategies for sort of buildings and master plans, and a lot of that advice and problem solving and solution finding was ignored, basically. I think that it's often not enough to just basically prove something or, find a solution. I think that a lot of what we're doing is a result of years of failure of our work not amounting towards anything. And so I think that a lot of what we're trying to focus on these days is the how to make it happen. How do we get on with it? How do we actually implement things? And I think, sometimes some numbers can help on that, but I think quite often it's a communication breakdown. And so I think creativity and communications can really help bring people together and align. And to be honest, I think more often than not, the barriers that we have can be a little bit imaginary. And if you bring everyone together, there's actually no reason not to just get on with a lot of these things. So sometimes it needs a out-of-the-box creative approach to try and help make that happen.
Let's talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing to transform Melbourne and that journey. And you started by writing a book that you aptly titled A New Normal. Can you tell us what A New Normal is all about in the context of Melbourne?
On a personal level, I guess I was sort of dream of mine to work on a full citywide strategy, and probably the right client never came about. I sort of was waiting for that to happen. How would I do that? And, I worked on buildings, I worked on master plans. I felt like the scale of the city was so optimum for trying to get great environmental outcomes, but I could never find who to go to. And then I sort of in time realized that a lot of cities, no one's really in charge. And it's like when I look at Melbourne, there's federal government, there's state government, there's local council, but actually I don't know who to go to have a discussion around the entire energy strategy, the entire water strategy, and the entire waste strategy. I also observe in cities all over the world that there are all kinds of amazing targets that people have, but there's often not a pathway to implementation. So we just decided that we would have a crack at trying to come up with a strategy on how to transform Melbourne to become the world's first self-sufficient city by 2030, by basically implementing 10 relatively boring initiatives. And I think that part of the name A New Normal was that we wanted to normalize something that's quite often radicalized. And the idea that a city has no negative environmental impact for us seems like a very logical baseline that we should be working towards. But it's the idea of it currently is still completely radical. So it became basically 2 years of calculations. We wrote a strategy, and then where things got exciting is we turned that strategy into 15 projects and are now actively in the process of implementing them.
And you're confident that I think you've said around 99% of the funding required to, I guess, execute those projects can come from the private sector. Why is this?
A lot of the work that we've been doing is with innocence. Like I often have no idea how these things are going to work, and I often ask around and assume that someone knows how it's going to work. And actually, what's often frightening but empowering is that sometimes no one knows how it's going to work, and that's something fun about trying to step in and work that out. And I guess a lot of the work that we did was not try and come up with our own opinion as to what should happen, but to more look at it robotically. And like if you asked a computer, what's the most cost-effective way of solving this problem, how would you approach it? Our first step was just looking at how cities around the world are trying to do this. And we basically just said, if we copied and pasted all of the cost-effective logical solutions from all over the world and applied them in Melbourne, what would happen? And along the way, one of the findings that we found was in Copenhagen, they'd estimated that 99% of the funds for their transition will come from the private sector. So to me, Denmark being a social democracy, it's if they're going to get the funds from the private sector, then, of course, Australia's much more capitalist than that. It's definitely going to come from the private sector here. And I think the thing to me that's exciting about that is that I personally think a lot of people want to blame the government for what's going on here. And to be honest, like, yeah, we've estimated it would cost about $100 billion to transform Melbourne. I don't think the government's really going to put much money into that. And each of the steps to get there are all profitable in their own right. But there's an ability for the private sector to unlock $100 billion of work that everyone can profit from and speed up something that is going to have to happen anyway.
I think one of the key words, that you just said is the concept of profitability. A lot of the conversation that takes place around discussions of renewables and that transformation process is always sort of clouded in one of being a financial burden. And so the way that you are able to communicate that actually this is a profitable process that we're wanting to go through, I think is really strong in your messaging.
I sometimes feel like maybe 5 or 10% of the population really care, and maybe that percentage is increasing. But my view is that we don't have enough time to sort of convince everyone to care. And I think that in some ways, environmentally, this is part of the problem, since the 70s or earlier, is that we've been basically having a small minority of like people like me that are basically, hippies that are trying to convince the rest of the population that they need to do something environmental for the greater good. As far as I'm concerned, this is something where maybe we need to try and outsmart ourselves a bit better on that and actually just empathize with everyone, whether they care or not, whether they understand or not, and find a way to make it work for everyone independent of their belief system. Do you know what I mean? And so to me, when you look at where we need to focus, of the fact that we need the private sector to deliver on this, then let's just lean into all of the profitable initiatives that are there. And when we ask the question, could we get there using only profitable initiatives? The answer is yes, basically, I'm sure there's a number of things along the way that, are hurdles. We've intentionally kept the strategy somewhat simple in terms of 10 initiatives because we want to get on with it. The reality is there's thousands of things, and there's a lot of things that will require investment that might be hard to justify, and maybe that's where the government funding might have to come in at some point in time. But in the meantime, there's a good $99 to $100 billion worth of work that we can get on with today.
Which is so exciting. I know you mentioned just earlier that, when you think about a city, it's hard to know who's in charge. But after writing A New Normal, you took it to the Andrews government to see if they would get behind it. What was their reaction?
I got a lovely opportunity to present it to an advisory committee to the Minister for Planning and the Minister for the Environment. And their reaction was very supportive. They were all lovely people, and they're all very much aligned. But they were very helpful in the sense that they kind of shared with me that they felt that the kinds of initiatives that we were proposing were too radical for the government to fully adopt right now. This was saying we need to basically electrify the entire transport system. We need to electrify all buildings, remove gas from cities, end oil, end fossil fuels, create a fully circular water system and a fully circular waste system. And so, rightly so, they said, hey, love it, but the government won't be ready for this. So they shared something with me that was extremely helpful. They said, if you really want to put your energy somewhere to try and help speed things up, the best thing you can do is go and build pilot projects, build physical examples of these projects that are profitable to gain the support of the private sector, integrate culture so you can gain public support and ensure that the people of the city love them rather than reject them, and do all of that to help basically de-risk it for the government to try and then turn this into policy. And so that's a lot of the work that we've been doing, is just trying to build physical examples of the policy that we would like to see.
And I love what you did next. So as I understand it, after getting that advice from the government, you then decided to have a dinner party, and you asked some very acclaimed Melbourne architects to join you. Can you share with us a little bit about that next strategic move? And what was so important about that dinner?
Yeah, it was a really special night. And it was, looking back, it was accidentally a bit opportunistic of me, but the timing was interesting. It was just after the bushfires and just before COVID. It was just that little window. And we, after receiving that feedback from the state government, it was a bit like, all right, well, let's just call up all our friends and see if we can turn this into projects. How can we turn that $100 billion strategy into 15 projects that we can go and build, basically? To be honest, it was supposed to be 10 projects with 10 initiatives, but I invited a few too many architects along, and so we made it into 15. And these are an amazing group of people that all kind of, most of them we knew beforehand, most of them we were friends with from various projects, but there were definitely a few new faces that came along. And it was a lovely night. I just sort of pulled my heart out for 30 minutes and explained the technical financial strategy. And we just asked them if they would help to try and turn this into something that people could connect with and could engage with. And I didn't fully understand how powerful that would be at the time. But I guess two things happened that night. One, it went from being our insignificant little Word document strategy in an Excel file that was sort of something that we were working on for a really long time that probably no one really was all that interested in, to something that had a collective ownership. I felt in that moment, that night, that whole room basically were just like, yep, let's do this. And we're doing it together and we're on board and we'll make it happen, which felt very motivating on a personal level and like quite inspiring for me to see how passionate they were all to get involved and help out and do something. The other thing is I was jaded about architecture in some ways at that point in time. There's been a lot of challenges. Personally, for me, I love and hate architecture in the sense that it's like something I'm very passionate about, but sometimes it can be not always as constructive as it needs to be environmentally in that sense. And this process really inspired me and reminded me why I love architecture so much. It's like, to me, it's sort of become more and more apparent that it is the vessel to create this transformation. And when I think about anybody else, in any other field, finance, politics, you name it, that architecture has the ability to grab this technology and solutions, find a site, apply it to that site, pull it together in a deliverable fashion, find a way of giving it a feeling and engaging people in that solution, and actually making it something that's buildable, but then all while having this really bigger picture political message that has the scalability to it. So it's become more and more apparent to me how like architecture can either be the problem or can also be the complete solution and driver to this whole transition.
In terms of what you then needed to do, so you were collaboration now, which is fantastic, but then you needed to bring the community on that journey, and you decided, as I understand it, to build a series of prototype projects to, I guess, illustrate how a new normal could come into fruition. Can you share some of those prototype projects with you that you did? I love the one that you talked about with the sauna on the roof.
I guess there's almost like three or four or five steps to it. It starts as a dinner, then we came up with concepts, then we basically turned those concepts into small-scale prototypes, and then the goal was to build full-scale pilot projects. And then from the pilot projects, the goal was to basically turn that into something that is policy. So after the dinner, all the architects came together and created renders for each of their projects, and we launched them at Design Week. Well, Design Week kind of got postponed for COVID, but we launched it online as a social media campaign. And then the year after Design Week, the NGV was an amazing sort of collaborator, motivator, instigator, supporter of what we were doing. And they encouraged us to do an exhibition of what we had come up with. And so in some ways, coming up with these renders and these concepts and this report was, interesting for probably a smaller community. We actually applied for some funding from the City of Melbourne and got some money to organise a sort of reactivation of the CBD event. We then basically built these little baby versions of each of those renders that we'd created. And so there was like the cousins created a little tea house, which was to exemplify the electrification of buildings. Grimshaw created a physical model of the sort of citywide transformation of the transport system. Mark Jakes created a video of people drinking treated sewer water in different cities around the world, and these things that he called shit misters. John Wardle Architects created a solar pavilion. Kennedy Nolan built a table that we could have meals at to discuss the projects, and that was built out of cross-laminated timber. And Fender Katsoulides built a physical example of what retrofit could feel like by getting an artist to kind of paint it. And all of them created this sort of curiosity. It was less about jamming the information down people's throats, and the kind of theory that we had behind it was that we wanted to show people, and we wanted people to kind of feel it and connect with it. And the cool thing was, through that launch process, we got a lot of press, and that press helped build a lot of momentum. And in that week at Design Week, we launched it. We got the award for Design Week, and we also got 8 of the 15 projects funded with 200 mil worth of projects. And now 3 of them are built, 2 of them are in construction, and the rest are either approved in planning and awaiting construction or awaiting planning approval.
That's incredible. Can you tell us about one of the ones that has been built?
Yeah, I'm sitting in one of them right now, which is a Plus Energy retrofit of an office building. And the other one that's built is a Plus Energy retrofit of a residential building. I feel there's a lot of talk about retrofit in the industry at the moment, but it's very helpful to have sort of a physical example to show people exactly what our definition means, in a sense. And they're both very specifically designed to exemplify what can be scaled up. So, there's 1.2 million homes in Melbourne that need to be retrofit. There's 40,000 office buildings that need to be retrofit. And so rather than hit up the government and tell them that they needed to go do something or chase people down about policy or something, we thought we should probably just start with one of each and try to do our best to make sure people love them. And so they're both going great, and we're sort of doing the monitoring of them at the moment. Another one that's built is our friends at Jaunt built a factory to electrify existing cars in the meantime. So that's exciting. They're scaling up their operations. And yeah, probably one of the ones that's worth mentioning that you brought up earlier was one of the projects that's got planning approval but hasn't started construction yet is an office building in Cremorne that has a 10-ton-a-day waste-to-energy plant in the basement. So it sucks food waste in from 340 restaurants and generates 4 times more energy than the building consumes. But it also has a cultural connection by sending waste heat up to a rooftop sauna. And to me, all of the projects are really trying to focus on this financial viability and scalability. And so if you look at, say, a waste-to-energy plant in that sense, we think we need probably about 150 of them decentralized across the city. I mean, this is really the motivation for us is like, yeah, let's just start with one. Let's like deal with those regulatory hurdles, deal with any sort of policy barriers that are getting in the way. If there are any, let's try and overcome them. And let's do our best to like bring design and architecture together to try to make sure that the local community are going to love that. So it's easy for everyone else to replicate.
That's a very good segue into, I guess, the next question. What's been the reaction of local councils? Are they supportive, and are they assisting you in getting the projects off the ground?
Like, as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, there's sort of innocence that we've taken into this whole approach. And one of the really lovely, unexpected things that came from how things have worked is that we didn't really realize how the collaboration but competition has been really helpful in bringing people together. And it's been a big kind of ethos of the project to bring people together. And so the architects came together and they were very lovely and collaborative, but also there was a little level of competition that kind of raised the benchmark. We felt that launching those projects gave us products that we could then share with developers, and they sort of became very motivated and slightly competitive to try and build some of those products. And we've had a similar effect with councils. I wouldn't say we have like any formal arrangement with any of the councils, but they've viewed it very positively. And in some ways, we weren't sure how the councils were going to respond. We wondered if, they might have felt like we were being troublemakers or we were sort of trying to make them look bad or something like this. But actually, I've noticed in government that there's some lovely alignment that we can have with all kinds of different government departments, whether it's state or local council, is that most of the people working in those departments really want the same outcome, but understandably have a lot more red tape that they have to work through and have sometimes got their hands tied to sort of be able to do something a little bit more, A, rapidly and B, radically. So there's just been a bit of an ethos of people trying to do everything they can to try and help make things happen. I don't have anything all that tangible to share with you to say that someone has done this specifically. There's a lot of goodwill and a lot of like positive support. And I can't give you the specific example publicly right now, but there are a number of projects that are in the works where councils are trying to use their levers to try and help us to not only get them across the line in terms of approvals, but to try and make the positive effort that someone from the private sector and a developer make an effort to do something like this, what do they get in return? And so sometimes we find that might be trying to help speed up the process, but often there's a nice bargain of trying to basically get more height on a project, for example, if they're going above and beyond.
That's good to hear. At Congress, you're going to be speaking to planning delegates. What do you think you're going to be encouraging planners to do differently through your presentation?
That's a good question that I haven't fully thought through. To be honest, there's a lot for me to learn about planning, to be honest. And it's like, I don't necessarily see myself as someone who fully understands policy or fully understands statutory or strategic planning, really. I'm obviously very involved with it in certain ways, but I feel like it's definitely out of my area of expertise. And so I guess for me, there's something on a personal level that I'd love to create more partnerships with other planners and people that know what they're doing to try and help work together more on this sort of stuff. So sometimes we find that often planners are the first people to get involved in a project from the get-go. And like we find that trying to get some of these initiatives involved in a project from before it's fully formulated is extremely important. Trying to do it right at the end is often really ineffective. So I think there's certain things like that, but I'm really curious in this. We've kind of moved from, a dinner to a concept to a prototype to a pilot project. And we're dabbling in the policy space, but I think that, I'm really interested to learn from others about how we authentically take a pilot project and turn that into policy that's where we'll shift the dial. And I think that's where probably more interested in trying to work out how we can work together on all that stuff.
Might be time for another dinner party.
True.
Maybe with 15 planners.
True. It's a great idea.
I know planners love going to dinner.
Yeah, that's good. We'll make it next Tuesday night. I'll see you there.
We might bring the podcast to a close. Ross, it has really been fantastic talking with you today. You are a powerhouse in your own right, and you are certainly pioneering what it means to do things differently. And I can't wait to hear your presentation at Congress. So thank you so much for making the time to speak with me.
Thank you so much. And can I just mention one last thing, which is that the future of where we're going is quite exciting in the sense that we're actually just about to launch in Sydney. And we're also having conversations in other cities around the world, including Mexico City, Guadalajara, and different places around the world. So I think as one last thought to leave you with, I think what we're learning in Melbourne has got something that's really applicable to all kinds of places around the world.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm excited, and hopefully you might touch on some of the work that you were about to start in Sydney at Congress, because I'm quite excited to hear about what that is going to look like and if there's an opportunity for us to get involved. So thank you again.
Thank you.
If you haven't already registered, I encourage you to go to the Congress events page of the PIA website. With speakers like Ross Harding, it is set to be a great Congress. If you have any questions, please email congress@planning.org.au. My name is Belinda Barnett, and thank you for listening to the 2024 Planning Congress podcast.